Welcome, everybody, to another reading of Jack's essay on Bergsonism, which is the book by Gilles Deleuze. Last time we left off around the complementary rule to the second rule and kind of Jack's interpretation of Deleuze's and Bergson's concept. So, how you feeling, Jack?
Pretty good. I could go over the three rules real quick, just so we can kind of catch up to where we were. So the intuition as method has three rules Bergson and Deleuze talk about. The first, we must problematize the method. This is a movement of intellect, a critique of false problems, and creative invention of genuine ones. Now, the second rule, differentiating, is a carving out and intersection through a diverging and converging. And then the third rule, temporalizing method, thinking in terms of duration. So now some of these rules, two of them have a complementary rule, so it really kind of turns into five rules. We're going to jump right into the complementary rule to the second rule. Ready when you are, unless you want to add anything.
I think we're good. Let's go for it.
So, that complementary rule, the real is not only that which is cut out according to natural articulations or differences in kind, it is also that which intersects, again, along paths converging toward the same ideal or virtual point. That virtual point is a very interesting part that the next chapter gets into, but the particular function of this rule is to show how a problem, when it is properly stated, tends to be solved of its own accord. In matter and memory, the problem of memory is correctly stated, since starting from the perception recollection composite, we can divide this composite into two divergent and expanded directions, which correspond to a true difference in kind between soul and body, spirit and matter. However, we can only reach the solution to the problem by a movement of narrowing. When attaining the original point at which the two divergent directions converge again, the precise point at which recollection inserts itself into perception, the virtual point that is like the reflection and the reason of the departure point. Thus, the problem of soul and body, of matter and spirit, is only solved by an extreme narrowing, in which Bergson shows how the lines of objectivity and subjectivity, the lines of external observation and of internal experience, must converge at the end of their different processes, all the way to the case of aphasia, which is a loss of speech or ability to understand speech caused by brain damage. Bergson shows that immortality of the soul problem tends to be solved by the convergence of two very different lines, that of experience of memory and that of a quite different mystical experience. Each line defines a probability, but it is of qualitative probabilism, so lines of fact are qualitatively distinct. And their divergence and this disarticulation of the real that they brought about according to the differences in kind, they are already constituted a superior empiricism, capable of stating problems and of going beyond experience towards concrete conditions. In their convergence and the intersection of the real to which they proceed, they now define a superior probabilism, one capable of solving problems and of bringing the condition back to the conditioned so that no distance remains between them. Now, this second rule, again, the main rule of that was to struggle against illusion, rediscover true differences in kind or articulations of the real. So natural articulations, that is, it's the properly stated problem. Now, the properly stated problem comes from the intellect, but and that's a creation, but to discover it, we have to use our intuition. Now, that second rule, and it's complementary, is the first movement of intuition, but we're basically going to have another movement of intuition, and that's the third rule, because we are temporalizing with duration. Now, that one says, state problems and solve them in terms of time rather than of space. Now, that's classic Bergson. This is going to show intuition as method, and how really to think temporally rather than spatially. So intuition presupposes duration. This is a kind of thinking in terms of duration. This rule gives the fundamental meaning of intuition. We can only understand it by returning to the movement of the division determining the differences in kind. At first sight, it would seem that a difference in kind is established between two things, or rather, between two tendencies. Superficially, this is true. The principal Bergsonian division, that between duration and space, all the other divisions, all the other dualisms involve it, derive from it, or result in it. This is not a simple confining of ourselves to affirming a difference in kind between duration and space. The division occurs between duration, which tends for its part to take on or bear all the differences in kind, endowed with power of qualitative heterogeneity, and space, which never presents anything but differences in degree, endowed with a power of quantitative homogeneity. There is no difference in kind between the two halves of this Bergsonian division. The qualitative difference is entirely on one side. When dividing something up according to its natural articulation, we have, on the one hand, the aspect of space, by which the thing can only ever differ in degree from other things and from itself through a augmentation, and on the other hand, the aspect of duration, by which things differ in kind from all others and from itself through a kind of alteration. We can use an example of a lump of sugar. It has spatial configuration, but if we approach it from that angle, all we can ever grasp are differences in degree between that sugar and anything else. This is extensity, looking at the spatial thinking. But it also has a duration. That is a rhythm of duration, a way of being in time that is at least partially revealed in the process of its dissolving. And that shows how the sugar differs in kind, not only from other things, but first and foremost from itself. This is alteration, which is one with the essence or the substance of a thing, is what we grasp and when we conceive of it in terms of duration. Bergson has a famous formulation here. I must wait until the sugar dissolves. That has a broader meaning where it signifies that my own duration, such as I live it and the impatience of waiting, for example, serves to reveal other durations that beat to other rhythms that differ in kind from mine. Duration is always the location and the environment of differences in kind. It is even their totality and multiplicity. There are no differences in kind except in duration. While space is nothing other than location, the environment, the totality of differences in degree. However, intuition is not duration itself. It is rather the movement by which we emerge from our own duration, by which we make use of our own duration to affirm and immediately to recognize the existence of other durations above or below us. Only the method of which we are speaking allows one to pass beyond idealism, as well as realism, to affirm the existence of objects both inferior and superior to us, though nevertheless, in a certain sense, interior to us. One perceives any number of durations, all very different from another. The illusion of false problems are inevitable, but in what sense? Bergson calls into question the order of needs, of action, and of society that predisposes us to retain only what interests us in things. The order of intelligence and its natural affinity with space, and the order of general ideas that tends to obscure differences in kind. Or rather, there are varied general ideas that themselves differ in kind, some referring to objective resemblances in living bodies, others to objective identities in inanimate bodies, and others again to subjective demands in manufactured objects. But we have a habit of mind that quickly forms a general idea of all general ideas, and to dissolve differences in kind in this element of generality. We make differences in kind melt into the homogeneity of the space which subtends them. It is true that this collection of reasons is still psychological and inseparable from our own condition. We must take into consideration more profound reasons. For while the idea of a homogeneous space implies a sort of artifice or symbol separating us from reality, it is nevertheless the case that matter and extensity are realities, themselves prefiguring the order of space. Although illusion, space, is grounded in the nature of things, matter being effectively the aspect by which things tend to present to each other, and to us, only differences in degree. Experience gives us composites. The state of the composite does not consist only in uniting elements that differ in kind, but in uniting them in conditions such that these constituent differences in kind cannot be grasped in it. That is to say, there is a state of things in which differences in kind can no longer appear. The retrograde movement of the true is not merely an illusion about the true, but belongs to the true itself. Bergson shows us where process philosophy can meet process theology with his static religion versus dynamic religion meditation with his last text, The Two Sources of Morality and Religion, Nature and Intuition. I wrote about it here, but in summary, static religion is that which at its source has nature, whereas dynamic religion is that which has at its source intuition. Now, the illusion is a result of us taking nature as a source of religion, morality, or reason of any kind due to its external nature. But the illusion does not result only from our nature, but also from the world in which we live, from the side of being that manifests itself to us in the first place. For late Bergson, became the variable essence of things that provides a deliciously complex ontology. Simultaneously, for late Bergson, space seemed to become less and less reducible to a fiction, separating us from this psychological reality. Rather, it was itself grounded in being and expressed one of its two slopes, one of its two directions. Bergson speaks of the absolute having two sides or aspects, spirit imbued with metaphysics and matter known by science. He would say, though, that the point was not that science is a relative knowledge, a symbolic discipline relegated to commending itself only by its successes or by its effectiveness. Science is part of ontology, as one of ontology's two halves. The absolute is difference, but difference has two facets, differences in degree and differences in kind. When we grasp simple differences in degree between things, when science invites us to see the world in this way, we are again locked in an absolute. Well, we can take a quick second here. How's that sounding?
It's sounding great. Loving it so far. I think what I find particularly interesting here is that there is a difference between early Bergson and late Bergson, and it's a very subtle difference, right? I don't think it's a very fundamental difference, but I think it's kind of more Bergson through time kind of gaining a higher maturity of his own concept. And I think I've only really read the majority of creative evolution so far, so I'm not a Bergson scholar by any extent. However, I can already start to see where this kind of maturity is taking place, and specifically with how he pays due to science and metaphysics at the same time. In particular, with science, like there's so many points in the book where he'll be critical of mechanism, or he'll be critical of the finalism and mechanism of science, but kind of in the same stroke, he's never quite dismissing them as valuable movements of thought. He even in fact goes into considerable lengths to show how useful they are and how science would not be possible without mechanism or finalism. They're kind of necessary functions, but just that there's another way of looking at reality besides just like a scientific method. I think that's what's really interesting is he wants to pull in both a scientific and a metaphysical approach in a way that shows their differences and does not melt down their differences, but at the same time tries to pull those paths kind of back together in a way.
Heck yeah, and it's definitely curious with mechanism, especially because Bergson and Whitehead like to do is kind of meet science where science is, and then speculatively go a little further, and that's always fun. Bergson wouldn't necessarily disagree with Einstein on a lot of things, and I probably similarly with Darwin, but they converge or diverge at a certain point. With modern physics more and more clearly revealing to us differences in number behind our distinctions of quality. Being locked in this absolute is an illusion, but it is only an illusion insofar that we project the real landscape of the first slope onto the other. If the illusions can be repressed, it is because of that other slope, that of duration, which gives us differences in kind, corresponding in the final instance to differences of proportion as they appear in space and already in matter and extension. Illusions of motionlessness or blocking of flows are what we aim to watch out for to maximize our pure mobility of freedom through intuition as method. So a couple terms here that we could speak of real quick. The illusion of intellect. This is kind of like a Kantian mirage. This is where we think in terms of more and less and confuse them. We disregard differences in kind between order, disorder, real and possible, being and non-being. That's kind of that non-existent problem. And combining it with the badly analyzed composite, it's the first lies in the second kind of deal. Now, these illusions of intellect fall into what Deleuze and Bergsonism kind of describes as cerebral intervals. Now, these are what the mind, or the brain, and which is the central nervous system in a sense, and the peripheral nervous system. We use this cerebral interval to obtain images of a material object and the actions issued from it only the elements of interest. Now, this interval produced by the brain is kind of used in parallel with fictions that allow us to extract a whole aspect of real experience, but subtract out that which does not interest us. Now, these intervals and these fictions, they are coming together and forming a wall of the intellect that our intuition must break through. Now, let's see. I claim Bergson is the philosopher of the future, and intuition as a method is our time-traveling vehicle. This method presupposes duration, much like, in a way, that a warp machine might fold the fabric of space-time in front of it, to provide itself its own ground of being to navigate, momentarily outside or beyond the realm of spatial-temporal relations. The moment one attempted to measure a moment, it would be gone. We are replacing possibility, the Kantian sense, with that of virtuality, replacing essence with that of event, and replacing substance with that of multiplicity. Bergsonism substitutes the notion of the condition of the genesis of the real for the notion of the conditions of possibility of representational knowledge. The positive name for this condition is the virtual. That is to say, the Deleuzian virtual is the condition of genesis of real experience. Deleuze rejects the notion of the possible in favor of the virtual through actualization rather than realization. The fundamental characteristic of the virtual, that which means it must be actualized rather than realized in its differential makeup. Now, in the present moment, we have what is actual, but we also have what is virtual. And basically what is virtual is retained and conserved in the present moment through memory. With the next chapter after chapter 2 kind of gets into that. But now that whole seed idea is heavily Tibetan Buddhist. So and I'm not the first to compare Deleuze to the East. But let's see if we can find some comparisons here. There's a text that I use called The Secret Oral Teachings in Tibetan Buddhist Sects. It's by David Neil Lama Yongden. It says, our senses deceive us in very clever ways. We give names to our sense perceptions, classify them into a series of similar objects, build them up with language, all for an end to create a world where our perceptions have become familiar to us in a workable, effective manner, like one might furnish a house in which they live. We do so through habits of thought and various other confusions in mind and mental traps. In the process of apprehension, reproduction, and recognition, we utilize habit and memory to understand the world around us. The kind of information that has been given to us by the fact of having seen something making us conscious of having felt a sensation. A sensation, nothing more, however, all the rest is interpretation. In the same way, all of our perceptions, those to which we give names and assign form, color, or no matter what attributes, are nothing but interpretations of a fugitive contact by one of our senses with a stimulus. This leads us to a kind of contemplation of the coexistence of two worlds, that of pure contact, not colored by screen of memories, and that created by the mental formations, or of the interpretation, samskaras. The first world, that of pure contact, unmediated, represents reality and is indescribable. We cannot think anything, cannot imagine anything about it without interpreting it in some way and destroying its character of reality. In this way, reality, or the real, is inexpressible and inconceivable. The second world, that created by the mental formations or interpretations, are set in motion by the contact stimulus. It is not the world in which we live, however. To say that it is not real, though, does not mean that it's devoid of existence. The oral secret teachings of certain Tibet sects say that this tangible world is movement, not a collection of moving objects, but movement itself. There are not objects in movements. That's kind of a Parmenides thing, also a Diamond Sutra thing. It is the movement which constitutes the objects which appear to us. However, they are nothing but movement. This movement is continuous and infinitely rapid succession of flashes of energy. All objects perceptible to our senses, all phenomena of whatever kind and whatever aspects they assume, are constituted by a rapid succession of instantaneous events, kind of like a movie. Each of these momentary happenings is brought about by manifold cause and multiple conditions acting together. Here, one should not think that the event is distinct from these causes and conditions. It is these which together constitute the event. Apart from them, there is no event. And this is, to me, the clear statement of process philosophy. I mean, again, this is found in Tibetan Buddhism, very, very old school of thought. From this, for me, process philosophy, we have to get a definition of an event. So here we go. The Tibetans would say, this word event must not be taken in the sense in which it is understood in ordinary language. That is to say, as meaning a fact of exceptional importance, as when one speaks of like a historical event. Event in this context means something which happens, has a duration or time period of which it unfolded within, and a space. These somethings arise instantaneously and in series. These rapid flashes of energy are sufficiently like one another during the series to remain imperceptible to us, then suddenly occurring in this series of moments a different moment which catches our attention. Perception equals object minus interest, and makes us think that a new object has appeared. This process is often explained by comparing it with the grain of corn, which remains apparently inert in the barn until one day the grain shows signs of disease. Now the grain has become something different in kind. Now it is lifeless and different from the original grain. It's a qualitative change. However, the inertness of the grain of corn was only in appearance, in virtuality. That which we saw as a lifeless grain was a series of combinations of causes and conditions, a series of separate moments, among which occurred other moments, which we saw as a diseased grain of corn. The secret teachings of certain Tibetan sects, however, do not teach the transformation from the grain of corn to diseased grain of corn as a transformation of the grain itself. The disease that the grain picked up exists in dependence or contingent upon the grain according to the classical formulation. This existing, that arises, which is not to be understood as meaning that this is the Father who has begotten that by a transmission of substance. This is the only occasion which rendered possible the appearance of that, again, contingency. Here, there are two theories we can speak of that both consider the world as movement. One states that the course of this movement, which creates phenomena, is continuous, as the flow of a quiet river would seem to us. And the other states that the movement is intermittent and advances by separate flashes of energy, which follow each other at small intervals, though we cannot perceive them, so they are virtually non-existent. Both of these theories, however, flatly deny any existence of matter which is motionless and homogeneous. When we look at an object, a kind of contact occurs with an exterior object, but this contact lasts only for a flash. When you are looking for a long time, what in fact is happening is a series of repeated contacts, each of which lasts only for an instant, and of which none are identical to the previous. They can never be identical due to the principle of motionless not existing. And phenomena, whatever they may be, consist in a succession of changes following one another, with a speed far beyond our faculties of perception and understanding. So a material organ we call an eye, maybe we could think of it as an image, consists itself of an aggregate of a large number of cells that are themselves not motionless. These cells that compose it are in a perpetual movement and are sensitive individually to numerous influences brought to bear on them by agents exterior to them and undergo numerous changes depending on the nature of their own evolution. The eye at the moment of the second contact is not identical to the eye which underwent the first contact, and it continues to change during every repeated contact thereafter. When we look at length at an object, these contacts bring to us a series of images that in their rapidity causes us to see them as a single image. In the same way, the object at which we are looking at itself, not homogeneous and motionless block, is a body formed by a large number of particles in movement. In their dance, they undergo change due to their own evolution, and changes caused by exterior agents. Again, they move away from or near to each other, forming different arrangements, different patterns. It follows that the object envisaged changes in reality from one moment to another. Now, again, that's all from Tibetan Buddhism. Now, to me, Bergson is brushing up so close to that. There's a parallel right next to it. Both assume motion, movement, and then go from there. That's at the heart of process philosophy, and the West is just kind of scratching the surface of an old tradition in the East. So, although the majority of us are misled by illusions of perceptions, which hide from us the forces at work, both in the organs and in the object with which it is in contact, it does not follow that we all share the same error to the same degree. By using certain methods, which we will explore further in future endeavors, we can learn how to navigate these illusions of perceptions in optimal ways. And we're diving into Kant, we're diving into William James, Aldous Huxley at some point, Doors of Perception. Where maybe we could almost call this a new kind of or an investigation into perceptual philosophy, where static objects don't exist, everything's in motion. If you stop acting, you die.
Bergson says in Creative Evolution that we only understand dead objects. And I think when he says we, he doesn't mean like everyone we, but he is specifically referring to how science gets us to think of the world. That we can really only understand science if we understand it in terms of dead objects. And that, I think that's true to a degree.
Absolutely. So what we can point out here is the beautiful, beautiful Deleuzian, Bergson, whatever you want to call it, formulation of the cinematographical
Yeah.
model. That is how we. That's how we can actually talk about the real. And again, the real is the thing Lacan is afraid of. Everybody's afraid of the real. I say use Lacan, what he formulated, but use Bergson to formulate the real. So what is the real? The real movement of the continuity of the whole is concealed from us by our habits of representation that are largely spatial. Again, we think and see too spatially, and through that, the real is going to be concealed from us. Now, this is the old metaphysical veil of perception, in a sense. The veil of perception abstracts things away from us by necessity. We cannot see infinity. If the doors of perception were waxed clean, we would see infinity for what it truly was. We can't do that, so we must abstract away and see what only interests us. Actually, what Bergson finds is we look at an object and subtract from that object everything that doesn't interest us. So we are not adding to perceptions, we're not adding to reality, we're always subtracting away from it. And that's what gives us some real perception. Now, that real perception, again, is flawed intellectually. We're simplifying movement into something mechanical that we give a kind of cinematographical character, which is like an adaptation to a current movement. But again, it's kind of a recollection. It's kind of an act of memory. We're just, instead of seeing reality for what it really is, we're putting in representations in its place and substituting that out of an act of convenience, because this is what we pay to have consciousness, essentially.
Right. And we already, just based off of what you're saying, our duration that we have, our experience temporally, is the immediate datum that we receive perceptually, but also in time.
Yes,
And
definitely.
and just to kind of build on that a little bit more, so we take in all of that duration as immediate datum, right? We take in everything. And however, I think it's because we can't walk through the world and make decisions scientifically unless we're able to abstract from that immediate datum, which you're saying is a subtraction, according to Deleuze and Bergson. And that subtraction is necessary because otherwise it would be very difficult for us to make scientific observations, right? But the problem that Bergson is seeing is that, well, we have started to mistake this subtracted portion, this carved out portion of duration, and mistaked it for the actual itself, which is why this virtual component is necessary. The differential makeup is necessary.
Again, for me, it all blends. Chapter 2 is made better by chapter 1. Chapter 3 is made better by chapter 2, chapter 1. Yeah. Because, as we just saw, this chapter 1 ends with, well, we need to temporalize. Mm-hmm. Well, temporalize through duration. Again, and in a sense, we find that what we can do with intuition is use our duration, our own personal duration, to sense other durations. If they're faster, if they're slower, we can align it. We can listen to a song. A song has a type of duration, and scientifically, if it's 80 beats per minute, it can actually calm our nervous system down, because that replicates the state we were in the womb or something, So these durations, we can actually kind of feel these. Now, that's intuition. Curiously, I found a definition from Bergson, in a sense. Okay, so intuition results from it's a mental capacity that results from integrating both intellect and instinct. Oh, it's something we unlock. How curious. Now, again, instinct is kind of the voluntary movement we see in animals, but also an automatism that we see in plants. Instinct limits the avenues of possibility and activity. Now, intellect offers us degrees of freedom, pure mobility of freedom, available through invention of tools. Intellect, we create, intellect creates. This is, we create concepts through intellect, but we discover their fun, we have fun with them through intuition.
Right.
But
And to add on to that just a little bit is that intellect, you're correct that it does have this infinite component, right? But the reason why Bergson wants to get us from intellect to intuition is that intellect can still only see those and understand those dead objects. We're still not looking at movement as flow. We're looking at how thing A becomes thing B. And this is a mechanistic way of becoming. And the real becoming we want is that differential element or that differential kind of movement of just the flow, just the movement. And that's what we're getting to that's a little bit interesting. One or many durations, I think, will be chapter 4. So I think I'm excited to see what you write on that coming up soon.
And we can end with a little radical empiricism if you'd like. So the perceptible flux is we can call phenomena. This is sensible particulars reveal realities, manyness in one constitution. William James says, we bathe in an atmosphere traversed by great spiritual currents. Some resist, while others allow themselves to be carried. Certain souls open as wide as possible to the breeze. They are the mystic souls. Aldous Huxley, again, how to traverse these great spiritual currents? Use intuition. You just need to tap in, become aware. Again, experience is a flow of phenomena. It's a flow, movement. If you find non-movement, typically the classic ancient formulation, of course, matter is inert, dead. It's falling. It's subject to entropy. It's subject to determinism, the scientific laws. So you could throw a tennis ball and you can understand basically its characteristics and what's going to happen. But the nous, or the mind, that which orders the intellect, does not go downward. It actually upward. It orders. It has preference. It has interest. It has desire. Now, this was Anaxagoras' famous formulation in the ancient world between mind and matter. Bergson, in process philosophy, especially with Deleuze, continues this. Not only is it mind and matter, but memory and matter and memory. Again, memory is held in the spirit. Memory, Bergson finds, is not something that actually takes on a physical character. It cannot. So we're looking for the virtual element, or the condition of the real experience. And creative evolution, that's a beautiful text to highlight that even more, the delineation of actual and virtual. What is the virtual? Why do we need it? We're getting at a creative vitality, creativity in all of its forms. So, but again, the main point, I guess, is with duration, or with the real, never forget that we deal with multiplicities. We have quantitative multiplicities, that with space we traverse, that's a numerical multiplicity. The parts differ in degree, and we have a qualitative multiplicity, that of pure movement, that is alteration. Now, to understand it like that movement is a composite, again, this is ancient metaphysics. This is Achilles and the tortoise. This is, through this understanding of motion, we can properly revisit plenty of metaphysical problems. I mean, we can answer metaphysics as it is. We're not afraid of metaphysics. We can enjoy science, but we can also enjoy metaphysics. Now that is quite a system that can boast that. That's why we like Bergson. That's why we like Deleuze, and Spinoza as well,
And Nietzsche.
and Nietzsche. Can't forget Nietzsche and Leibniz.
Plenty of them. The minor philosophers, as Deleuze would say, they go against the view of philosophy as being subordinate to other disciplines, and instead see philosophy as a pluralism, which is just another way of saying empiricism. Pluralism equals empiricism. The way that we can understand the one is through a study and investigation of the many. But this study isn't communication, and it isn't just reflection, but it's hopping between different intensities and not staying in one place for too long. It's a nomad science. That's why we like Deleuze. We like to be in many places at once.
Maybe some nomad emotional engineering here soon, a la Fisher and Spinoza. We shall see.
Excellent. Any closing thoughts?
A flux of feeling gives us access to reality. Don't deny the internal experience, that of affections, and don't deny the external experience, that of perception. This is what we deal with. We're not disregarding any parts of reality. It's a composite, and we're trying to embrace it in its whole.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Jack. And this will wrap up our second reading of Jack's essay. And hopefully we'll be able to do more of these. We are still doing some readings of Deleuze's book, Bergsonism. We just read chapter 3, and the next chapter we'll be reading will be One or Many Durations, which is chapter 4. Looking forward to it. Hopefully wrap up Bergsonism soon, and then move on to some more Deleuze books. We'll see where we go. Maybe we'll read Kant, but probably not. But we'll read some philosophy, and it'll be fun. Thank you, everybody.